Okay, so hi everyone, welcome to Riskified's final webinar in our four-part series. So the goal of this series is to help you prepare your fraud team for the upcoming holiday rush. And today's topic was voted by you, our audience. So we'll be discussing digital products and how to handle them. We'll also be discussing consumer fraud and also increasing approval rates. So please know that throughout the webinar, if you have any questions or comments, you can fill them into the GoToWebinar panel, and I'll address all the questions at the end of the webinar. And so for all the new attendees, I'm first going to introduce Riskified, and then myself, and then we'll jump right into the webinar. So just a quick recap about Riskified. So since 2012, Riskified has been reviewing, approving, and guaranteeing transactions, thereby helping our merchants grow. So more about myself, my name is Andrew Cashin. I'm part of Riskified's growth team as an account executive. So previously I worked in Canada in the financial services industry. And at Riskified, I help clients improve their existing fraud processes. So for those of you who are new, this is what Riskified's process looks like in a diagram. So merchants submit orders to Riskified for review, and Riskified will immediately analyze and review the orders using multiple technologies and methods, resulting in a clear approve or decline decision. So our technology was built to approve as many high-risk orders as possible, resulting in our clients having increased approval rates than previously before. Also, all approved orders are covered by a 100% chargeback guarantee, meaning that none of our, anyone who's our client, they're never going to be paying for chargebacks again. And lastly, we deliver a quick and frictionless experience for our clients' customers. This means that we don't reach out to customers and we don't cause any friction at the checkout process. So we've been fortunate to work with thousands of merchants across all verticals, from electronics to ticketing and travel. And through this experience, we'll share a lot of actionable advice today. So today's agenda, my goal for today's webinar is to help you prepare for the upcoming holiday. So areas I'm going to address are how to review digital goods orders. Then I'll talk about how to increase your approval rates. And then lastly, we'll end off with how to handle consumer fraud. So our previous webinars included how to train and manage your team to handle the holiday rush. We also had a webinar on how to automate the fraud process to lighten the load on your team. And the webinar before this one was how to optimize manual review to drive sales while preventing fraud. So last week's webinar, we discussed how to minimize manual review times to avoid shipping delays, and we shared the best practices for avoiding false declines. And we also discussed how to better prepare your team to handle international transactions, and in general, how to make sure manual review is efficient and accurate so that you don't have to keep your customers waiting during the holidays, and also so that you don't wrongly reject good customers. So if you missed any of these webinars, or if you want to learn, see any more of our resources, you can go to the link below, so riskified.com/resources. So digital goods transactions, they're a bit tricky. So what we're going to do is cover the challenges as well as Riskified's approach to these orders. Also, I'll outline how Riskified's team reviews these orders and what data points we recommend that you focus on. So effectively reviewing digital goods orders is challenging. The reason digital goods are particularly difficult are because first, there's no shipping address. So unlike tangible goods, we don't have a shipping address, so we can't use a lot of the classic, cross-verification methods like billing shipping distance, shipping address matched to identity that we can use with tangible goods. Secondly, it's known that there's a higher fraud rate with digital goods. So the 2015 MRC Global Fraud Survey, they found that the average fraud rate for digital goods was 11% higher than physical goods. Also, with Riskified's data, we know, so with the US ticket market, it shows that there's nearly twice as much fraud in e-tickets than in physical tickets. And also, digital goods is known to be a common testing ground for fraudsters, before they try to attack the tangible goods. And lastly, it's the quick turnaround. So this is kind of the customer's expectation. So unlike other orders where you can spend a bit more time manually reviewing and validating the order before you decide to ship it, with digital goods consumers, they're expecting an almost instant approval and shipment. So no one wants to wait around for a couple of days or hours to receive a gift card or a ticket for an event. And it's really easy, if you're keeping them waiting for a long time, it's easy for them to just switch over and go to a competitor's website. So now let's talk about how Riskified approaches digital goods and how we recommend that you should approach digital goods also. So in digital goods orders, you should consider the email address to be the shipping address. So the buyer's email address can be considered as the billing address, while the recipient's email address can be considered the shipping address. So while you can't cross-check these email addresses in white pages, it's important to try and link this address to the customer. And so with the buyer's email address, you want to look at three things. Firstly, you want to be looking at the email age and appearances. So fraudsters will often open new email accounts to commit fraud, and then they'll move on to a new account quickly because they know that the previous email is probably blacklisted by the merchant when the chargeback is incurred. Therefore, the older the email account, the better. A simple online search of the email address can be very useful. So you want to try to find when the email first appeared, and this helps kind of determine the age. So you want to look at the context, so where the email appears in. So perhaps you'll find someone signed on for an online petition. Maybe it's associated with a social media account. So sometimes you'll find the email appears in a context that will help you link it in terms of geography. So an example with an email linked to geography, it could be if you're looking for an email and an email appears, when you're searching for it online, if it appears at a certain school, then you can tie in the school's location with the order IP, and you can try to link all that together with the email to see if it makes sense. So secondly, you want to be looking at the email domain. So the email domain can hold a lot of valuable information, and it can help you link the address to the buyer. For example, do they have a country-specific domain that matches the IP? So this is something like gmail.co.uk. And perhaps maybe they can also be, from a UK IP. And then that's a good indicator. And so with those email accounts, also with some email accounts, that they're easier to get access to. So stuff like free email services, there's going to be more of those. Also with specific emails, a lot of fraudsters wouldn't go for exposed fraud, meaning that they wouldn't want to use their work emails in a fraud attempt. And lastly, so with an alternate email address, so when you don't find email appearances and you can't link the email address to the customer, it's sometimes worth it to request for an alternate email account, sending an email to the first email account asking for an alternate email. So this can help prove that the customer has access to the first email account, and it may help you link the customer to the email. So next, I want to look at IP address and kind of other data points. So with IP, we want to be looking, does it match a good purchase story? So we touched on this idea of story-based approach in our previous webinars, which states that we want to be reviewing orders as its own story. So we're looking for both a good story and a fraud story. And so with IP address, you're looking for more about the controlled IP ranges. And then specifically, so with controlled IP ranges, this is something like a corporate IP range. So since fraudsters usually try to conceal their location and identity, it's highly unlikely that a fraudster will connect from work when placing a fraudulent order. Another option is for fraudsters to hack into corporate networks, but this is more difficult by simply using regular proxy Regular proxy is, which is less likely. Also, if you're not able to detect proxies, then it doesn't make sense to rely on IP address information. Otherwise, you might not be seeing the full picture, and you could be prone to making mistakes. So the other data points that we're looking at, so you want to be looking at the referring website. So you want to see that before they came onto your website, how did they get there? Were they referred through a relevant article or an advertisement? Or were they referred from a referring website like a fraudster forum? Then you want to be looking at the phone number. So you want to search data sources and even the web to try to link the phone number to the customer. You want to figure out where this phone number is registered, who it's registered to, and if it matches the story. Then you also want to be looking at language. So it's important to see what language the customer is using on social media like Facebook and LinkedIn. And again, does this match the good story? And lastly, the browsing patterns. So when they went onto your website in order to buy, what pages did they visit? Also, was this their first time visiting the website? So to sum up, digital goods is tricky because there's a lot less data points. So this is why we really recommend focusing on email, IP, online behavior, and using any information available to determine whether the story makes sense or not. So next I want to look at how to increase approval rates. So also we'll be touching on the financial impact of false declines. We'll be looking at the basic approach that allows us at Riskified to approve more orders. Then we need to look at how we categorize false declines over here, and then the ways to reduce these false declines in the future in order to boost approvals. So when you wrongly decline an order, it's harmful for several reasons. So first off, it's lost revenue right away. So this is pretty straightforward. You're declining a good customer and you don't make money on that sale. Additionally, with this sale, you're also losing the customer lifetime value. So if a customer goes onto your website and they get rejected, it's very, very unlikely that they're going to try to come back on and place an order. Also, in many cases, the rules or policies that lead to false declines are normally associated with new markets or international orders. So for these, you could really be losing on a lot of growth opportunities in terms of international orders and expanding internationally, and then also with reshippers. And last, so on top of all that, when you decline a good customer, you also lose all of the cost of acquisition, so all the money you spent and marketing spent in order to get that customer onto your website. So we want to be able to reduce these false declines as much as possible, especially for the holiday season upcoming. And so before we really look at how to reduce false declines, it's important to look at the categories of false declines to clearly identify your problems. So here's where we categorize the false declines. So here you can see high-risk orders. So this is kind of, nothing's inherently wrong with the order, but it looks high risk because, the average order, it's way above your average order ticket. It could be from a high-risk country. Maybe you're not used to selling in Russia and this order comes in from Russia. So this is a common, reason to decline an order just because, there's a couple of high-risk flags that go off. Another reason is unexplained mismatches. So this is when you have, billing shipping mismatch, maybe a card country and nationality don't add up. And this is probably the largest group of false decline reasons that we see. And it's mostly characterized by international orders that have more mismatches than domestic. So again, this is normally for teams who are used to their domestic market, but when you're expanding internationally, you often see a lot more mismatches. And the last category of false declines, it's with the classic fraud indicators. So these are good. These are orders that exhibit fraudulent behavior, so proxy usage, order shipping to a reshipper or a package forwarding service. Also orders linked to an address or a user with a chargeback previously. Okay, so then here are the ways Riskified approaches all the types of orders. And so we touched on this last week in last week's webinar. So first we want to tell the story. So for every order, we want to look at the available data points to try to weigh the good story versus the fraudulent story. So some common legitimate explanations for suspicious and risky looking indicators, it could be college students, military personnel, corporate connection, or reshippers. And secondly, we really want to shift our mindset. So in the field of online risk management, it's really easy to forget sometimes that the vast majority of your orders are good. So reducing false declines requires you to change your mindset. So a mismatch does not mean fraud. A high-risk indicator does not equal fraud. You should be assuming the order is legitimate. If you have no reason to decline the order, then you shouldn't be. So in terms of methodology, in order to reduce false declines, without adding friction to the customer experience, we want to recommend the following. So first, try to find the answer within the order itself. So without reaching out to the customer for additional information, often you have enough information within the order itself to kind of resolve any sort of mismatch and to be able to approve the order. So second, it's familiarity with legitimate explanations to suspicious looking indicators. So in the world of fraud prevention, it's easy to forget fraudsters aren't the only ones who use reshipping services or proxy services. Yes, fraudsters do like to use these services to conceal their identity, but plenty of good customers use these services too. So if you're familiar with good, legitimate use cases, you'll be able to quickly see whether the data points within the order, whether it's a good story or whether it follows kind of the fraudulent purchase story. And last, we want to be able to link the data to the customer and seek positive indicators to anchor the good story. So as we noted in the previous slide, our approach is to consider all data available and weigh the good story versus the fraud story. So we want to see which makes more sense given all the data. So it's your job to evaluate the order and to determine if there's really a bad story here. So try to tell yourself the bad story and determine how probable you think it is. So this is the methodology, and now let's look at some examples. So some legitimate reasons to use risky looking features. So it includes proxies. So some customers, they need to use proxies because of where they're located and they have less access to internet. So this could be someone at work who has to use a proxy to get onto your website. This could be a Chinese customer who has to use a proxy to have access to your website also. Or it could be a business person who's traveling abroad. So next with reshippers. So a lot of good customers use reshippers because it could reduce shipping costs. And also, if your company doesn't allow shipping to a certain country, then the customer needs to use a reshipping service. Also, so linking with chargebacks. So a chargeback could have been submitted for a certain address. So if you use a blacklist or a system that relies on matching addresses to chargebacks, this could be very misleading. This could be an entire apartment building, for instance. It could be an old tenant. It could be a reshipper, or it could even just be a fraud victim. So to help us, anchor our good story, what we want to, at Riskified, what we're really looking at is we're looking at strong email indicators. So as we mentioned above, an old email with a unique username that matches the customer's name. So something like andrew.cashin@gmail.com. Then we want to be looking at, connect customers to address. So search for the customer's name and physical address, the billing or shipping, and see whether you find a match. So you may discover it to be their home address or their workplace. So we often see orders that our billing address is a home and the shipping address is a college dorm. So this is, a classic example of a college student placing an order. Then we could look at closed IP linked to a customer. So by closed IP, we mean an IP range that is controlled by and registered to an institution or organization. So such as a corporation or a university. So in the case of the college student, By looking up the IP, you may see that it belongs to their university, and by validating that indeed the cardholder or recipient is enrolled in the college, this provides a strong anchor for the good purchasing story. And then, so email domain matches customer identity or bin country. So again, in the case of the college student, the email domain may be student@harvard.edu, and another positive link is to the bin country. So let's say you have a Chinese email domain, so someone@qq.com, and if it's used in an order with a credit card issued in China. Okay, so to continuously learn and improve your team's success, I want to highlight, Riskified's best practices. So what we think that you should be doing. So tagging declines. So this is very important. So every single time that you decline an order, you need to make sure to tag it with the level of certainty. So meaning, how certain are you that the order is fraudulent and should be declined? And then periodically, you should be reviewing the borderline declines, those that you were kind of unsure about, and you should try to identify which ones you should have approved. So it's much easier to kind of look at it in retrospect when you have a bit more time to think about it. Next, you want to be doing test approvals. So if you're not sure whether you can trust a new data source, or if you suspect there's a certain pattern that might be legitimate, this is a good time to use a low order amount to learn something new. So this means that you should approve some of the low amount orders and see the results. A few months down the line, if you incur a chargeback, either in a few months you're going to incur a chargeback, or you're going to discover that you may be able to approve orders that until now you would have otherwise declined. So this is, for example, a Chinese credit card and a Chinese email. This is something where if you see a low amount order, you can test it out and then wait a month or two and see if a chargeback incurs. And if it doesn't, then you know that these two could be good indicators and could be a good story together. And so really that's our advice to reduce false declines and in order to increase approval rates. So our final topic that we wanted to address is how to handle consumer fraud. So two types of consumer fraud, what we deem them to be at Riskified are friendly fraud and liar buyer. And so these are kind of just Riskified terms that we use. And so the first being friendly fraud. So generally, the types of people who do friendly fraud, it's teenagers or it's children using their parents' credit card. Normally they're buying goods like games, sneakers, or smoking items. And in terms of identification, so the buyer will often not realize what they're doing is wrong, and so they're going to give the real information. So this helps to identify these cases to avoid approving the orders. And so it's fair to say that the friendly fraud and consumer fraud in general, it's tough no matter what, because usually everything looks good because it is. So secondly, with liar buyer, so the types of people that are, liar buyer, it's usually first-time customers. What they're buying, really it could be anything. It could be anything that they want to pay for. A lot of the times merchants will have the notion that it has to be, a high-ticket value item, but really it could really be anything, low ticket, high ticket. In terms of identifying, so these are the customers that purchase something and then claim it never arrived. So there's no, it's very hard. There's no way to identify these cases up front because they don't involve unauthorized card usage. So the legitimate card holder is using their own card to place the order, and no one can really predict they'll lie about it later. So in some cases, they don't mean to lie. They just don't, really know what's happening when their card gets charged and when they see their credit card bill. And so what can be done is to link orders so you know to decline the customer when they return to your store. And what's really nice with Riskified, we have the experience and ability to link data across all of our merchants and verticals. And we found that this really comes in handy for us. So here's, this is an example of, what Riskified said before, the liar buyer. So this is a woman who purchased this hat, this hashtag selfie hat, and then she claimed she never received it. So after incurring the chargeback, we wanted to look online, and we actually found that, she posted this photo of her wearing the hat that she claimed she never got. So, for you guys as the merchant, this could be really, useful evidence for disputing the chargeback. And as the MRC noted in their 2015 global survey, on average, merchants dispute 56% of chargebacks, and they report victory in 64% of the cases. So, to sum up with the consumer fraud, there's really no easy way to kind of tackle it, but you have to be proactive with tagging, and, to be the most proactive you can is to be able to tag and really try to stay on top of it. So again, here are the takeaways from today's webinar. What I really wanted to hit home with you guys. So the email address and IP, how critical they are for these digital goods orders. Second, I want you guys to remember that most orders are good. Always try to find the good story in the order, and don't decline it unless you're certain that it should be declined. You should seek all the positive indicators that you can. And lastly, with preventing friendly fraud, you should be looking at details provided, and also be sure to tag as much as possible. So this will be helping your team to continuously learn and to become better. And so I wanted to thank everyone again for joining Riskified's final webinar in this bootcamp. I hope it was insightful, and I hope that you're able to take away some useful insights and some actionable advice. And now I wanted to take any questions from the audience that you had. Okay, so the first question is, are there any fraud indicators that are specific to digital goods? Can you recommend a site for IP address lookup? And I have with me Emily, our senior fraud analyst, who will be happy to handle this question.
Hi everyone. About digital goods fraud indicators. Well, there are some classic fraud indicators, physical and digital goods as well, such as recently created email accounts, proxy usage in an unrelated shipping address or credit card country. They do apply in the digital good market as well. Some of them, however, like an unexplained proxy usage or recently created email accounts, are even more risky in digital good than in physical goods. This is because the proxy usage may indicate an attempt to disguise one's online identity, which is the only relevant identity in this case, which is not true in physical goods when we have a physical address to relate to. Having said this, do remember that there are legitimate reasons to use proxy connection, as explained before, so you shouldn't automatically decline digital goods orders with a proxy. About the IP address lookup, we do recommend one IP lookup tool, which is MaxMind. Every IP address gets a score from 1 to 100, indicating how likely it is to be fraudulent. But we would like to stress out that, like many other fraud prevention services, MaxMind is a bit biased towards being risk-averse, which means that, for an example, despite the fact that there are many good customers in Mexico, nearly all IP addresses from this country get an incredibly high MaxMind score. So in general, it's a very good service, but don't make a decision to decline an order solely based on the risk score from MaxMind. That's it.
Okay, so the second question here is, what can we do with liar buyers?
Liar buyers are a very tricky issue. Their orders look legitimate because they are, in a way, very legitimate. Or at least don't involve an unauthorized car usage. The customers are the rightful credit card holders. They usually ship their goods to their own addresses with their own emails. Everything that identity-wise looks okay. So the best practice here is to identify and tag those who have already committed this fraud, so we won't get burned again. And as shown in the presentation, in this type, because it's so blunt, we can find the customer very easily. So you can find the customer after serving their chargeback and see if you can dispute the chargeback as presented in the presentation.
Okay, so there's one more question from the audience, and it's saying, so are reshippers good?
We get this question a lot. Reshipper are a solution for a problem for the customers. So we did write an elaborate blog post about it. You can see it on our website. But in a nutshell, they're a solution to people that cannot get your product to their country because either there are high shipping costs or you don't ship to their country at all. So if, for an example, you're an US merchant and you see an order from China with a Chinese credit card, a Chinese email domain, Chinese IP, but the address sent to is in the US, you're probably looking at a legitimate reshipper situation. So don't just decline it. The bad reshipper usage is in case someone wants to disguise his identity. So when there is no sensible reason to use it, like a US domestic issue, if someone sends with a US card in the US to a reshipper, that's a bit off because you probably you can send there, so you don't need to do that. So in this order, the customer is sending the item to a reshipper only to conceal his identity and final destination, and these cases are bad ones.
And so there's one more question. It's, does signature confirmation help with liar buyers?
If I understand correctly, you're talking about signature confirmation when receiving the package. So I guess this is not really a analytical case. It's just kind of your routine there. If the signature confirmation confirms that it's the customer when he gets the package, so I think it's a credit card company issue, but you should check with your routine with them.
All right, so those were all the questions. And thank you guys for joining in. I really hope that it was insightful and that you gained some actionable material from the webinar. And if you ever wanted to continue the conversation, you can see my email there, andrew@riskified.com. I'm happy to talk with anyone. And yeah, thank you for joining again and have a great day.